Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So I am setting a 10-minute timer for petty grievances, and we are just jumping right in. First of all, I sent a picture to my mom. Every week I send a picture of what my belly looks like to my mom and my godmother. I do not send these pictures to men, although men keep asking me, and I don't really understand why. You realize you're asking for a picture of my body, which is it doesn't make it better or less weird just because another man put a baby in it. That doesn't change the circumstances of you asking to see what my body looks like. So anyway, I sent it to my mom and my godmother, and my mom was like, "Whoa, you are really stretching that shirt to its limits." And I was like, yes. Someone else had a grievance, which I don't think is petty, but I'm going to read it anyway. I would love to spend more time on this, but I have all the topics I want to get through today, plus a bunch more that should take us through the next couple of weeks. So I have a grievance I'd like to air, Olivie, although I'm not sure if it's petty or not. You can be the judge. It is a real grievance, but I'm going to judge that it's appropriate for the allotted petty grievance time. I know the minimum wage issue is tricky. Is it really though? But it's just so rude when people say that instead of being given more money, what people need is education and skills. I have no stats, but I'm positive the amount of people employed in minimum wage industries is astronomical. The assumption that minimum wage workers are all uneducated dummies is nonsensical. Very true. It's also crazy how so many people were in such a hurry to open these essential businesses, right? And it's bars and restaurants and coffee shops. Who are these people? These are the minimum wage workers. So who did they think was going to do this? Remember these essential workers, and now we don't want to pay them? Oh, okay. Many people work them for many different reasons, including actually enjoying the job despite being underpaid. And the reason that a person does a job shouldn't even be relevant to how much they're paid. That doesn't make any sense. Either the job is valuable and you pay people what they're worth or not. Customer service is a skill on its own, but many of those jobs also involve learning other skills as well. A lot of higher wage jobs also teach people the things they need to know on the job, and no one claims that makes them low skill jobs. Also, these jobs will still exist. The service retail industry cannot survive being solely run by 15 to 22-year-olds who are busy from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. 5 days a week, not including time needed for homework and extracurricular activities. We aren't at the point of total AI domination for now, so education and skills levels aside, someone has to do them. So basically, the grievance is if you're going to look down on millions of people as being undeserving of proper financial compensation, at least come up for arguments that make sense for why they don't. Yeah, all of this is nonsense. It's just that people of extreme privilege don't want to lose their privilege. They're really good at reframing the situation that's this isn't about not wanting people to get paid. This is about saving the small business and making sure that we can, and it just ultimately comes down to the fact that people just don't want to give up things that they have, even if they won't need to, or their perception of what they're losing is way extreme compared to what's actually happening. How could it possibly be bad? That's just economic theory. How can it be bad to put more money in people's pockets? They will spend that money. It's not like people who make minimum wage are out here putting them in investment accounts and saving for retirement. Who can do that? From any argument you want to take about minimum wage, I want to say that the one about intrinsic value of being human, and that being human, you should be allowed to afford things and have disposable enough income that you're not starving and unable to fundamentally unable to enjoy your life. If we set that aside and say that the only thing that matters is the economy, then it still matters that those people have money, because it means they will spend it, because it means that they will then go out and buy goods and services. And that is only good for the economy. There's a lot of really stupid arguments, and it really I think it ultimately always comes down to someone who just can't stand the idea of losing even the tiniest margin on their profit. And then they ultimately convince the lower classes that giving to someone means taking, that giving to your neighbor who works minimum wage means taking from you who also doesn't have enough. It drives me absolutely crazy that the only class solidarity there is at the top, which is crazy because they don't even have very much to lose. You could never spend that amount of money in a single lifetime. It just Oh my God. Okay, this is not going to get robbed from like your local mom and pop business. Like this, no, that's not who's losing here. But yeah, the reason I'm filing this under petty grievances is because, like, you know, normally when I'm answering a question, I like to solve it, but I can't solve this. This is just people don't want to give up what they perceive as theirs. And it just seems to be human nature that people always want to look down on someone, which is going to be relevant to our later conversation, but yeah. My other petty grievance is that my cousin, who is biracial like me, just did 23andMe, and there's this thing that's been, like, she did it a few weeks ago, and there's something that's been sticking in my head, and it's not relevant to anything, but I'm gonna bring it up. Her white half was broken down really, like really far. Like, she could see with the exact place in the United States or in England and the other parts of Europe where her genealogy came from. And then when it came to our Filipino heritage, it just said Filipino. And it's been driving me crazy because there are different kinds of Filipinos. And I mean, for one thing, are you saying indigenous, or are you like, it was striking to me that there wasn't any inclusion of Spanish or Dutch or Chinese, which most people who are Filipino have some mix of that. And I think that the statistic that 23andMe was giving her was essentially that they were just factoring, like, you know, the Philippines was colonized hundreds of years ago. It seems like maybe Filipino to them just already includes that mix, because I think you would be hard pressed to find someone who is from, say, Manila, who didn't have Spanish, Dutch, Chinese somewhere in their lineage. So I just have to assume that, like, the research that's involved sounds to me very like Eurocentric. And I don't have any thoughts on that really, just that since she told me, it's been this like barb in my brain that's just been driving me crazy. That's like, at what point do you decide that, like, oh, that's just Filipino? Like, oh, they've been fucked by the Spanish for 4 centuries. That's just what it is. Like, at what point does that become factored into genealogy? And I know that the Philippines is a small country, but it's also, doesn't that make it a microcosm for what colonialism does to Latin America and African countries? Like, how much research has been done there? So I don't know if you guys have done 23andMe, but I'm like, well, this isn't like this. What does this mean? Like, you're not even going to tell me where in the Philippines they came from? It seems like because it's islands, you should be able to figure that out. So yeah, it just kind of made me wonder, you know, in a week when we're going to be talking about colonialism and classism, it just makes me wonder, like, how, my 10 minutes are up. It does make me wonder how many resources are actually being devoted to what the effect that colonialism actually has on even things like biological research. Moving on. I'm setting another 10-minute timer to talk specifically about Meghan Markle, the British royal family, Breonna Taylor, and Sarah Everard. Let's see if we can get through all of this. Here we go. A lot of people asked me what I thought about the interview. And I'm glad I waited, because I want to talk about not just the interview, but I wanted to wait and see what the fallout would be from the interview. I really wanted to see what the Queen's response was going to be, and how the royal family was going to respond to it. In terms of things that were surprising, I mean, the depths of Meghan's struggle were surprising, as in, okay, we didn't know that, and certainly did not know she was going to talk about it that openly, which I appreciate. And, you know, we also didn't know how much her story was going to resonate with Black women. I think that just a lot of what she was saying about not being supported and not being protected is something that's true of women of color, and especially Black women. And for that message to be told in a way that so many people would hear it and that would resonate so far was, like, I do think very valuable. But I don't think any of the other stuff was surprising. Like, we all saw that she wasn't protected. We all watched it happen. And, you know, and you could see, like, in that very famous interview where someone asked her if she's okay and she gets very teary-eyed, you can see how difficult of a time she's having. We'll talk about the suicide ideation later. If that makes you uncomfortable, I will let you know when we start talking about it. But in terms of the implication that the royal family is racist, Hello? Yeah. I've had this argument with British people before, and they don't appreciate it when I bring up the fact that, like, the royal family's right to rule is essentially based on divine right. It's no longer right of conquest. So they didn't like pick up a sword and win England. Like it was handed to them. It's primogeniture. So the one time that I asked someone, I was like, so do you still believe in divine right? Like, is that what's taught in schools? And they got really angry at me because they were like, we're not stupid. And I was like, okay, I'm not saying you're stupid. I'm just saying, like, how do you validate the existence of this family? If not divine right, because the whole aristocracy, classism, and by implication racism, because it's not like they were mixing, is built on this idea that they are genetically blessed. Hello, blue blood. Where does that come from? Except for some sort of genetic superiority. So you're going to tell me that family is racist? Like, yeah. Duh. And those of you who have read The Commoner's Guide to Being a Royal, and more importantly, The Princess's Guide to Popular Statecraft, already know my feelings on that. That it's just kind of like, of course you have a problem. As soon as the royal family starts marrying commoners, American divorcees, is it really that surprising that then people are like looking down on those people? There were a couple things about the interview. I mean, Meghan addressed how Kate was called Waity Katie, and she said there was a difference between rude and racism. That's correct. I also think that there is a really, I don't really want to touch the idea of like the weaponization of white tears and all of that happening, because like I think ultimately Meghan is voicing a universal truth about being a Black woman. And so whatever your opinion on her, including her privilege, including the colorism of the fact that like Meghan Markle is essentially white passing and she hasn't really had to think of herself as a Black woman until now. Whatever your opinions on that, we have to acknowledge the fact that what she's saying is true for many Black women. And we have to not only accept that that's true, but also, do something about it to the extent that we are able. But I did think she was glossing over the fact that when Kate was initially William's girlfriend, a lot of the coverage about her, and more specifically about her family, was very classist. Meghan is new. She is the new target, and she's the easy target. Who knows what people would still be saying about Kate if they didn't have Meghan as a villain. This was another thing that Meghan pointed out, was that the press is unethical, it's unchecked. They create this villain hero narrative because that's what people want, a story, right? Like any storyteller will tell you this is what people want from their stories. They don't necessarily want the truth, and they don't necessarily want fair coverage. They'll just believe whatever they believe. The way that people have been talking about Meghan Markle is so sketchy because a lot of people really just don't want to face their internal biases. They're having for the first time to defend why they were so quick to believe all these stories about Meghan, and they don't want to accept that. And it's just, here we are, human nature again. So yeah, I think that's why people are getting really ugly with it. And then yeah, the one other thing was that Archie not having a title has to do with like only the grandchildren of the current monarch have titles, which does not include Archie, but would include him when Prince Charles became king. But like, this is such a dumb technicality. It just underscores how ridiculous the royal family is and these rules. Like, I get a lot of people who pop up in the Commoner's Guide to be like, oh, you messed up this thing. And then ultimately I didn't mess it up. They're wrong, but because everything's so confusing, it's like not really clear. What's a British monarch to an American, I ask you? Not much. What's a king to a god? What's a god to a non-believer? Etc. If you're going to show up in the Commoner's Guide to critique me on my knowledge of the British monarchy, like, okay. Most of the research that I did for the Commoner's Guide was based on, I wasn't trying to look up the royal rules because I had already made some changes and altered the timelines and stuff. What I was really looking at was coverage of Kate. I read a lot of Kate's early coverage and a lot of Meghan's press coverage to kind of figure out how to write the misogyny of the press. That's just like, okay, these two women are both outsiders. Neither of them are royal. We have accepted within the system that some people are better than others, but these two are not. And yeah, of course, I think it's interesting who the British royal family chooses to protect. It's It's crazy, but not illogical that they would throw Meghan to the wolves rather than Kate, who's going to be William's queen consort, and Andrew, who is a member of the royal family. Like, as much as it sucks and as gross as it is, it does make sense. Or just like when Prince William said that they're not a racist family, the question was, are the royals racist? And William said, no, we're not a racist family. What else was he gonna say? Same with the queen and her response. I'm not saying I love it, but what is she gonna do? Because the moment that the queen says, you know what, you're right, we do have to have a lot of conversations about racism, she also has to decide, well, we gotta give back everything that's in the British Museum. And while we're at it, we have to give back the Commonwealth, because guess what? That wealth is not actually meant to be shared with England. Like, I'm gonna exceed my 10 minutes. I just think that what people are expecting is not going to happen until the royal family is ready to abolish itself, which it's never going to do. But I do think that the Meghan and Harry interview was basically a nail in the coffin. Initially, I didn't know why they were doing it because I knew it wasn't going to make them any more friends. Oh, yep, there go my 10 minutes. I really think that the queen responded to it as well as she could. That was essentially like, okay, well, some of this stuff isn't really true, but we're going to talk about it. Like, what else was she going to say? Not saying I support her. I'm just saying that the existence of the monarchy is ridiculous and there is no defense. Not until people are ready to have the conversation that's like, we probably shouldn't kneel before someone just because of what they were born to, because that automatically leads to the concept of racism and classism. So ultimately, do I think that the interview was brave? Not really. I do think that the interview was smart. I think that the royal family thought they could bully Meghan because their perception of their own power, they are the most powerful family in England, but only if you acknowledge that. I mean, only if you are like, yeah, the monarchy is legit, do they actually have power? Because in terms of what is real power, you know, economically, or what's going to bring people, what's going to bring millions of people to watch an interview, that's what Meghan and Harry have. So they tried to bully someone they couldn't. And I think that ultimately it was, you know, ultimately Meghan and Harry just came for the royal family and they lodged a critical hit. I've said a few times that, like, I feel like they did this for revenge, and I respect it. Because they were like, you know what? You thought you could bully us and you couldn't. And now here's a fundamental weakness that anytime anyone thinks of the royal family, they're going to have to include a look at what they really are. That's going to be ugly. It's going to be ugly because there's no other way. There's no other way to view it. So about mental health, if you don't believe Meghan saying that she didn't want to be alive, that's, you know, you either believe people or you don't. And it is important for the sake of the real people in your life that you acknowledge that when someone tells you their truth and that is their truth, you accept it as true. Yes, Meghan is privileged in a lot of ways. And I hope, really after this, I hope we just don't have to discuss her much anymore, because it is frustrating. You know, it's like, I'm glad we got to hear you touch on mental health. It's especially ironic. I just want to say, it feels strategic to me that they didn't reveal who in the family was being racist. It's just kind of like shots fired, and like, you don't want us to reveal it, do you? And by leaving the door open for speculation, it means that anyone could be guilty, which makes the whole institution guilty. Petty, but I respect it. And then, one thing I think, you know, as a person with bipolar, one thing that people don't really talk about with depression is your like loss of resilience, that just like, things that wouldn't normally bother you stick more. There's a reason I don't read like currently reading threads, or I don't seek out reviews of my work. You know, it's one thing if they get sent to me or whatever, but I don't like search myself because I don't really want to know, because I don't know what's going to like maybe stick to me, or I never really know when I'm fragile. And for Meghan to be like alone and feeling isolated, whether that, you know, whatever you think is true or not, she perceived herself to be alone and isolated. And that is enough for you to wonder, like, am I safe here? Am I in a place where I feel safe? She clearly didn't. You know, and especially being pregnant, it's a really fragile time. I get it. It's so fragile. Things that I would otherwise be able to shake off, I can't. They just stick like darts. And then I've just got, you know, I imagine myself like covered in like Velcro, you know, and everything just like sticks to me and I can't get rid of any of it, but I also can't carry all of it. And that's when things get really hard. And yeah, that's just something that, you know, her experience does sound true, but it doesn't matter whether it sounds true or not. That is her truth. Accepted, not for her sake. I mean, sure, for her sake, but for the sake of the people in your life who do feel that way and need support. Just, I think how people talk about that has been tough to stomach. The other thing I wanted to say is that we got to be done with the British royal family now. We got to be done talking about it. We've heard everything we need to hear. We know everything that was said. We know. We can understand intuitively. What I think is important here is we have to continue supporting Black women to the extent that we were doing last summer. It's been a year since Breonna Taylor's death, and it must be so awful to hear Meghan Markle said so many more times than Breonna Taylor. And, you know, I think the best that we can do to honor the truth that Meghan shared is to do something about the fact that, yeah, Black women are really unprotected. They do kind of fade into the background. Their names they'll get said long enough for, you know, a hashtag movement and then it disappears. How do we help Meghan? Meghan doesn't need our help. Meghan has Oprah on her side and she has plenty of money and she's got Prince Harry, she's fine. We don't need to help Meghan. What we do need to do is take this lesson that we're learning from her, living it very publicly, and apply it in ways that we can. Banning no-knock warrants is like, I don't even know why those exist. And, you know, in considering racism and who matters, this is another thing that's come up with the Sarah Everard case, which is awful. It's awful for all women because we already live in fear. And this is a woman, I think what has been so intriguing about her case is that she did everything right. People keep saying Sarah Everard did everything right. She wore bright colors, she called her boyfriend, everything they say to do. And not only that, she was white. She did everything right. She was even white and it didn't save her life. I don't want to focus on the idea that like, oh, we talk about this one white woman and, you know, she becomes a martyr to the cause when there are so many women of color who this happens to and it's like they're treated like they're more expendable. I think that actually what's so interesting and horrible about this case is that this woman is like, she shouldn't have been a target. And it reveals so much about the biases that we have, the difficulty we have putting it aside, but ultimately it comes down to what can we really do for women who are vulnerable, and we know that they're vulnerable. We live in a world that is unethical. The press is unethical. The courts, I mean, I couldn't believe that when we found out the main suspect was a cop. I really feel like if it had happened in the United States, that cop wouldn't have been charged. So yeah, just try to remember that the Meghan Markle case is flashy, but it is just an extension of things that are happening to women and to women of color all the time. And there has to be something more that we can do for each other besides fixating on this one case. We just have to use this, you know, very public example of a woman who has been in a vulnerable position. We have to believe her. We have to listen to her. We have to apply these lessons where we can really do something about it. There's a couple of other things. I'm like so hot. All this ranting. So the first one is about hybrid authorship. Do I have an editor for my self-published books? Yeah, usually it's a different person each time. Definitely at least one, usually two other people get their eyes on the document. I don't hire an editor. I just have really good friends whom I love. But yeah, who are usually, you know, and it's sort of a tit for tat thing. And then I edit when they need me. But yeah, do other people edit my manuscripts? Yes, I am the last person to look at them. I'm the one who takes the brunt of the responsibility. But also as a reminder, I was never like selling a lot. Like I don't really market my self-published stuff because I kind of always knew in the end that that's just not my skill set. I'm not really good at social media. I don't like that part of the job. So the part of self-publishing that is running your own business is the part that I didn't really like very much. So it was always in the back of my mind that I wanted to traditionally publish, whereas self-publishing was just like, well, I've got these manuscripts. I think that there's an audience for them, and so I can just give them to the people who already know they want them. The fact that that audience has grown has been a surprise to me. I think moving forward, I might have to invest a little bit more in the process of my self-published books. For the most part, yeah, it's just me. I enjoy the grind, which is the writing, the editing, the formatting, the design, all of that I enjoy. I hate the hustle. I hate the trying to sell this book and trying to convince people to read the book. I barely am even able to, like, when people thank me in like really elaborate ways, I hardly know what to do with it. Yeah. I'm one of those people who doesn't take compliments well. Second question is, what does your agent and or publisher think of you self-publishing? They said, it was my understanding that once a publisher picked up a self-published book, the author would continue down the traditional road. Yeah, that is what would happen. I've never had a publisher pick up one of my self-published books. I've only had a publisher buy unpublished manuscripts, so that doesn't apply. But in terms of having both a self-publishing and a traditional publishing career, that's called hybrid authorship, and it's much more common now than it has ever been. Pretty much every writer who isn't Joanne Rowling has to have a side gig. And so ironically, my side gig is like writing more books. But I think it's pretty common. Like Catherine Valenti has her Patreon. Maggie Stiefvater has her, I think she has something like that too, where, you know, they continue to release things on the side as part of their business. Their authorship is their self-run company. And that's essentially what I'm doing here as well. I've obviously had to make a separation between what I write for young adults and what I write for adults. That's why I have my pseudonym and have to use my real name as well, so that it's pretty clear which brand is which. What does my agent think about it? The traditional publishing part of my career is very new, so this isn't something where I would say we really have a handle on how it's happening. When I spoke to both my agent and other agents in the past, including one of the ones who made me an offer, was that I would maybe want to continue writing, you know, adult SFF, even if my young adult romance career took off. I'm still interested in having these other projects. And the understanding was like, okay, if there's a road for traditional publishing in those genres, I'll be there to take you down those. Or, you know, if it continues to be just sort of a small thing you do for like side income, then that is fine. The Atlas 6 is a confusing one because it's a project that existed prior to signing with my agent, and I had always intended it to be a series, and it's unclear what I can do now in terms of, like I said, I can't interfere with my young adult book coming out, which is why I'm not coming out with the sequel to the Atlas 6 until after that other book comes out. I have obviously obligations that are have to take priority, but it's not off the table. And as for some other people have asked me if it's possible for the Atlas 6 to get picked up by a publisher and then like re-released and have the future books be traditionally published. It has happened. That's what happened with 50 Shades of Grey, I believe. It's definitely what happened with The Martian. It's possible, but because it's such a hassle, the publisher has to really be sure that it's worth it. The editor who buys it has to be like willing to deal with the legality of that. So I wouldn't call it likely. I will call it possible. It would just have to sell like in large volumes. Like the reason that 50 Shades was able to push as far as it did was because people bought it. People were really into it. So yeah, I'm not sure what that number would have to be for me, for the Atlas 6. I don't know what that number would have to be, how many volumes would have to sell before it became appealing to a publisher to own the franchise. I also don't know if the road is open for, you know, like film, or like if I could do something with a script. No idea. So these are all sort of future projects that we'll have to talk about another time. I've also definitely, I ran out of time even with my expert timing system. So yeah, unfortunately, we're going to have to get to the other questions next week or after. The other question was, it's about how long it takes for me to write a book and whether I have multiple projects at the same time. So we'll save that. I mean, the answer is yes, but we'll save that. This has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.